Hello, Mike Phillips. I'm sorry I can't be there with you today. I'm somewhere up in Edinburgh right now, and really I'm going to talk about my experience of Donald Rodney, or parts of my experience of Donald Rodney, and also the making of Auto Icon, and how it relates to some of the other work that I was involved with Donald over the years, which is now creating a few interesting curatorial issues, basically by the nature of this work being digital and mechanical. Also, hopefully, I would like to put a marker up for Donald and the work that he did, which is still extremely contemporary, not just the politics that Donald was dealing with, his own personal politics, but also how the work that he did really does manifest itself now in the work of topics such as AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but also the bioart movement that's been making grounds quite recently. So I'm going to start with how I first met Donald, which was here at the Slade School of Art. Well, this is actually looking at UCL into the quad from the Slade School of Art, where we both started, I think it was 1985, in the mixed media, it was called the mixed media area, Studio 5, which is sort of on the left as you go in there. And we both happened to be put into the same space. And I guess a connection we had from the outset was the fact that we were both from Birmingham. But my particular interest and the way I got into the Slade at the time was because of the sort of early digital stuff I was doing with ZX81s and the like. And there was an interesting changeover. I spent a year in the States before I joined the Slade. I deferred the start of it, and there was a big shift from Tim Head, who was still sort of continuing with the legacy of some of the digital work that had been done around early computing stuff, Chris Briscoe, I think, and the work that was going on relating to the computing department, and Stuart Brisley taking over, where the next intake, which was Donald's intake, was far more politically orientated than the kind of schoolboy playing with balsa wood stuff. I think somebody commented on my work at the time. I haven't used balsa wood for quite a while now. So this is the Slade, and this is the studio. And I point to the studio because at the time Donald was making great headway and was sort of really accelerating to the stratosphere with inclusion in this, which was the state of the art. And that image you saw of my studio there actually was a photograph of the footprint of the cameraman who stood on my artwork and videoed Donald working in his studio for that TV program. So this is Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher who founded UCL, the Godless College, and here you can see him stuffed as an auto icon, his term, which we borrowed for Donald Rodney auto icon, and here you can see he had himself mummified. It went slightly wrong with the mummification of his head. It became rather distorted with the sulfur and shriveled up a little bit. So here you can see his wax manifestation. The head is kept in a box, sometimes under the chair or probably somewhere safer. And this idea he had was that we would leave ourselves as statues for the future and line our driveways with our ancestors, or indeed get the actual auto icons to perform historic characters on stage as kind of wooden actors. This really, was something that lurked around both of our imagination. In Donald's case, it was very physical to do with the work that he was doing with his body, and there was this mummified body in the hallway of UCL. And we used to talk about it quite a lot, and it never really seemed to become relevant to either of us until I was driving down the A38, and this again being, when was this? 98, I think it was 96. There was a lot of discussion in the culture sphere about avatars and being sort of like slightly post sort of foundation of the web. There was a lot of work going on with cyberspace and how we would be manifest in these chat rooms. William Gibson and Count Zero and all that kind of work, where people were designing these kind of entities, these avatars, which would be our representations in this cyberspace. And it all seemed quite cheap and nasty, and as representations, rather hollow. And what I was trying to do was to create something which would be a little bit more credible, in that it would have not just some kind of representation, image of whoever it was who would exist in this state, but would be a digital auto icon containing all the kind of bio data that they would have had in the real world, the kind of medical data, all the sort of data cloud that would follow them around at the time, and somehow that would make these entities more than just an image. And so driving down the A38, it seemed like a sort of middle-class white boy having this idea of some kind of existence post-death in this space was particularly pointless. And then, of course, it struck me that Donald would be the perfect candidate for this. And it was also this kind of weird idea that, as he said several times, that his clock was ticking with his sickle cell anemia, that at the age of 36, he would be no longer with us. And it sort of made the idea, well, very pertinent, I think. And when I met with Donald and proposed this to him as some kind of digital manifestation of both him and his creative process, and the idea of including all of the kind of medical data that he collected about himself, from his frequent internships in hospitals, that this auto icon would have some kind of credibility beyond the just simple visual representation, that it would be an active auto icon. So unfortunately, we put in an Arts Council grant. Donald died the day that it was awarded, and there was a short period of time when we were figuring out what to do in his absence. And like Psalms, which I'll mention later, that absence became very important in defining auto icon, because we formed a group of individuals. Gary was very much involved with this when he was at Innova at the time. And we assembled Donald Rodney PLC, who were his friends, other artists, and people who worked with him, helped him deliver some of his his works, because of his physical inability to do some of that work. We got together and formed this group, got approved from the Arts Council, and continued with the development. And here you can see the kind of interface for auto icon at the time, which was this piece of skin, which was Donald's skin, that was actually a spare piece from this work in the house of my father, where you can see a little house that Donald is holding here in his hand, which was made from the skin from an abscess that he had on his thigh, which he crafted into this little house. We used this as the interface for Donald, again kind of reiterating the kind of physicality of the auto icon. This became literally the interface. You clicked on these three buttons. One was for information, one was for this kind of bio of Donald. You can see here there's some slides and a sort of simple website where you had all of the information that we had at the time on him. And then you would move into the main interaction, which was this chatbot. You call it a chatbot now. It wasn't really called a chatbot. It was this AI. It had characteristics, I guess, of Eliza, who was a very early AI based on a Rogerian psychotherapist. And indeed, we used some of those ideas of a systematic dialogue with somebody. The Rogerian psychotherapist kind of asks you and uses keywords to have a discussion with you. So you say how you feel, or it says, how are you feeling? You say, I'm not feeling very well. And it says, tell me why aren't you feeling very well? So it uses these keywords, but it also uses a questioning back to you all the time. So it's always asking you something back. In Donald's case, we tried to capture his particular style of conversation, in that it was it worked very well in the context of auto icon, because Donald was this kind of catalyst of innovation. You'd talk to him and it would just fly all over the place, so you never got a straight answer. So in a way, it was a kind of inversion of the psychotherapist, or the Rogerian psychotherapist, in that the key words that you can see here were tagged from all of the documentation we had of Donald, the video, his writings, the interviews that people had with him. And these were called up in response to the questions that you asked him, or asked Donald Rodney AutoIcon. It also captured part of his creative process in that he would continue, or it would continue, the work that he'd been doing, often whilst hospitalised, in that he obviously couldn't get to some of the different kinds of production materials that he used for his work. So he used a lot of magazines, created these montages, and this kind of approach was embedded in Donald Rodney AutoIcon here, in that it would respond, it would do searches for images, or you'd have a conversation with it, it would pick up keywords, it would then search for those words on the web, pull out images from where it had searched, and it would include these in this kind of continuing montage. So using some of the same algorithm that he used in his creative process, we deployed that in this simpler version, of course. But it became not just a conversation, it became a dialogue with the work that he was producing. So actually AutoIcon is a little difficult to display these days because the operating systems it was designed for just don't exist anymore. Windows 9 and Windows 95. I think we had Windows 2000 sort of do it a little bit. But it is problematic also. The Perl scripts are no longer running on the Innova AutoIcon server as well. But this is a problem that a lot of Donald's work actually suffers from now. The stuff that wasn't painted or made of X-ray films, the stuff that was electronic or digital is suffering from the same kind of curatorial problem of how do you display it. We've recently showed Psalms. You can see here it's an autonomous wheelchair. This was written in DOS. It's from '98 and as part of Donald's last show. And also Visceral Canker, which has been recently purchased by the Tate. Here you can see the sort of lavish space that it's being conserved in and rebuilt in, but they have a particular problem with it, where they can look after these gold heraldic arms. They can replace the gold leaf on those, but they're finding it very difficult to make a decision about the electronics, which have now perished. Originally purchased from RS, they're not sure whether they want to actually rebuild them or just take some off-the-shelf equivalent, or contemporary equivalent of this. So AutoIcon's quite interesting. It appeared at a time in our digital history where we were still sort of scavenging around trying to find some kind of format that would be had a legacy to it. But I think what's interesting is the curatorial problems of how this work can be maintained, looked after, and indeed celebrated in terms of how important it is, both to kind of art history, but also specifically relating to contemporary issues of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Many of you will have Sirius or Alexis running. This was the predecessor to that. But also in terms of the bioart that Donald really did excel in. With the House of My Father, in the House of My Father, with Visceral Canker, a lot of this work was way ahead of its time. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.